And we had the forecast, and it was like when COVID was like creeping into the United States, and we had this event right in the middle of that. And about a week later, everything was shut down right after this event, after glowing reviews about how good the economy is doing. And here we are. Last year we did it online, so many of you might have been with us for that. But you know what? It feels awesome to be back together with you in person today. And we're so grateful that you're able to come out and participate. So welcome each and every one of you. Back in 2017, that's when the Chamber, Bank of Utah, and Weber State University created a little team. The team came up with a vision. And that vision was to create an event for the businesses of Northern Utah where we could walk away armed with some information about how to better do business decision making. And we wanted our businesses to be informed by the best and brightest people who live with our economic data and information on a daily basis. And so we committed to bring those people here. And I can tell you, we have them with us today again. And we're really looking forward to our speaker lineup. It's going to be fun. As part of this event, we could not be here without our sponsors. And the team of Bank of Utah, we love you, and we are so grateful that the Chamber, the University, and the bank are such wonderful partners. It means the world to us, and so thank you so much. And I would like to give a big round of applause for the Bank of Utah. I should have introduced myself. My name is Chuck Leonard, president of the Ogden-Weber Chamber. I also wanted to recognize we have 3 premier events every year for Northern Utah business, and this is one of them. Another 2, we have a couple of symposiums that we do. We'll have those again this year that we work in partnership with the university on. And what really drives that is our sponsors that we have as keystone partners for the Chamber of Commerce. And I'd like to just recognize that now they are on your program. They're at the bottom there, but I want to call them out by name because they are so important to our work, both to our local economy, to helping our businesses run here. Business Depot Ogden, Staker Parson, Standard Examiner, Wells Fargo, and America First Credit Union. Thank you so much, guys. Please, let's give them a big round of applause. I'd also like to recognize our partners in our many cities that we have here, representatives from many of our municipalities, and we thank you for your support. This part means a ton to have government and business come together in unity to help drive our economy. I would like to recognize we have our county commissioners here with us, so I'd like to recognize Commissioner Harvey, Commissioner Rohr, and Commissioner Jenkins. Yes, please, a round of applause. So, our partnership is wonderful, and so with that, I would like to turn the time over right now to hear from our dean of the Goddard School of Business of Weber State University, Mr. Matt Morrison. Matt, come on up.
Good morning still. Great to be with you today. I love this event. I've loved attending it over the years in its various forms during the pandemic. As I've looked around the room, it's been fun to see some familiar faces. And I think about the role of the Goddard School, or any business educator's role, in preparing the next generation of business decision makers. And I think about those students that I had in the past that are well into their careers, excelling in every way. And I think about the class that we had together. introductory accounting. So financial accounting. And in that class, when I tested them, there was always one right answer. And they got used to this, one right answer. And as you know, and as they know, that's not the way life works. So as they go on, and it was really enjoyable to then have those same students later in a graduate class. And as is often the case in Weber State, in a business school, most of our students are working full-time. They started their careers, and they know full well that there is not one right answer. So when I think about the economic forecast, I think about all the variables that come into play to make a decision. So when I've seen those students then in a graduate course, I've seen them be able to synthesize multiple models, multiple data points, looking at lagging and leading indicators, and try to come up with the one best decision or multiple best decisions in a given situation. And that's challenging. One of the things that we've tried to do in the Goddard School recently over the last few years is integrate and expand the tools available to students to be able to make better decisions. And this often involves more analytics, more technology, more business modeling, so that they go out with the tools they need to be able to excel as business decision makers. So I'm grateful for the partnership that we get to be included in this event and the Northern Utah Business Symposiums that we get to put on every year. And thanks for being here and joining us today. And I'll introduce Brandon now.
Well, thank you, Chuck. I love Chuck. He has such great energy and optimism, and I really appreciate him. And thanks, Matt, for your leadership and guidance there at the university. Welcome again to the 2022 Bank of Utah Economic Event in partnership with the Ogden-Weber Chamber of Commerce and Weber State University. I'm Brandon Hansen. I'm the Chief Business Officer for Bank of Utah. I'm so excited to welcome you here today for this very important event. Today's important because we are witnessing economic events that never happened before in our lifetime and may never transpire again. A 4-year high inflation rate, the Federal Reserve printing enormous sums of money, now contemplating interest rate increases and unprecedented home price appreciation, especially here in Utah. We're so fortunate today to have 3 special guests to help us understand what's going on in the economy, including one of Utah's most influential and respected economists, Natalie Gochnour. We also will hear from Eric Allen, an expert on residential housing, and Michael Jeanfreau from the Utah Department of Workforce Services. I'll read their introductions and then we'll turn the time over to Michael. Michael Jeanfreau is a senior economist who serves the northern region of the Utah Department of Workforce Services. He loves the challenge of gathering, analyzing, and translating economic information into understandable narratives that help provide actionable insights to community partners. Michael has 2 bachelor degrees from Weber State University. When not immersed in synthesizing data into mental maps, Mr. Jeanfreau runs a D&D group and enjoys beekeeping. Next, we have Eric Allen. I've known Eric Allen for many, many years. I've always admired his passion for understanding the Utah real estate market. Eric is the Senior Vice President of Advisory and oversees the Utah and Idaho markets for Zonda. Eric's responsible for all consulting, speaking engagements, and managing client relationships. Eric possesses a vast knowledge of the local real estate and home building community and currently sits on the board of directors for the Salt Lake and Northern Wasatch Home Builders Association and the Homemade Utah chapter. And then our concluding speaker will be Natalie Gochnour. Many of you already know Natalie. She was a featured speaker at this event 4 years ago. Natalie is well known in the business community and has the governor's ear regarding Utah's economy. Natalie serves as an associate dean in the David Eccles School of Business and the director of the Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah. She also serves as the chief economist for the Salt Lake Chamber. A native Utah, her professional focus and passion are public policies that promote balance, stability, and prosperity. I'm sure you all will greatly benefit from your time with us today. And thank you for being here and supporting us. Turn the time over to Michael.
I tend to wander, so I didn't want to do this one. I walk around as I go. Welcome, everybody. My name is Michael Jeanfreau. I'm a senior economist for the Department of Workforce Services, and I serve the northern region of Utah. That's essentially everything north of Salt Lake. And I wanted to talk to you guys about the economy. And we're going to break down what's going on right now. I think the biggest concern is kind of this labor shortage, jumping right into it. So we're going to look at it kind of in terms of what's going on in the short term, with a quick economic update, where we are post-COVID. And a lot of what's going on right now in the short term is lingering COVID effects. There's still a lot of upset as things settle out from there. Then we've got the Great Resignation going on in the background. That's a lot of the headlines, so we're going to talk about that too. And then in the long run, we have some structural changes. These are things like population things, labor force participation. And these are issues that preceded the COVID-19 recession and are things that we expect to see in the future afterwards as well. So quick update right now. On the right here, we have a graph of growth rates over a 2-year period. And so you guys can see obviously the decline we had in 2020, but we've jumped back really quickly in Utah. We've been back to growth for a while. In measuring growth, the department has started using a 2-year benchmark instead of a 1-year, so that we look before COVID hit versus afterwards. So looking back in January 2020, before COVID started hitting, to now at the beginning of 2022, we're over we've had 10,000 jobs added in northern Utah, and we've had over 53,000 jobs added in the state. So these are new jobs above and beyond where we were before. And we jumped back pretty quickly. This is a comparison to the nation that's still down negative 2.6% over the same time period. So we've done pretty well. Unemployment rates right now are at a record low. We're at 1.9% in Utah. The northern 6 counties together are at 1.5. That's super low. To put this in context, when you're learning about economics, there's this idea of full employment that's usually around 4 or 4.5%. Where there's this idea that if I'm a company who fires somebody, it's going to take me some time to get a new person into this position. So there's always going to be a little bit of friction. And we consider full employment, like everybody who wants a job can find it, at about 4.5 to 4%. And we've been below that for a while. I mean, cash is at 1.3%, which is absurdly low. It's getting really difficult to find employment. Now, as that's gone lower, we actually see that from before and after the pandemic, we do have a similar employment population ratio. We have about the same percentage of people employed, but we've seen less people looking for work. Our unemployed has grown. Growth hindered by labor availability. So that's kind of what we're running into now. We just don't have enough bodies to fill the jobs that are open. And lack of labor is going to lead to higher labor costs. So catching us up to where we were, I want to talk about this job flow. This is the Utah JOLTS data, Job Opportunity and Labor Turnover Survey. And it tracks 4 different things across the state. The top blue line is the number of job openings we've had. The green line underneath is the amount of hires. Yellow is our quits, and then reds are our involuntary discharges and layoffs, so you get fired. And you can see throughout the year, we've got 2020 starts, I'm sure it's later, right here. And as 2020, that big red is COVID. COVID hits, people get laid off, we've got health restrictions that come in. We start bouncing back pretty quickly. We have some early returns. It's very unusual for the hires line to go above the openings, because to fill a job, you need an open position. And in this case, it was strange because people were coming back to work. It wasn't necessarily a new job, right? So we've got these early returns. To point out too, in response, quits dropped. So as everybody's getting laid off, job security goes down a little bit, quits are going to drop in response to that. But as we go through the year, people are getting confident. Before the end of the year, our openings surpass our hires again. This is when we start going back into growth. We've got quick recovery. Of course, this isn't even across all industries, but on average, we're back to growth pretty quickly. By the end of 2020, and that's the beginning of 2020 on the right there, we had a lot of similar measurements that we had before the pandemic as well. So we're wrapping up the year here, and we see that a lot of our flow is about the same, right? But then over 2020, what we saw is our openings just exploded. In the spring in particular, people got more confident about, people are coming back, vaccinations have been available, winter's thawing out, spring's coming, everybody wants to go back to work and open up, and our openings just explode. And in the beginning, our hires do keep up, right? So for the first little bit, but you start to see that distance grow over the year between the hiring and what's available. And the key there is that those bottom 3 are bounded by people. To have a hire, you have to have somebody to fill it. To have an opening, you just have to have an opening, So it's not restricted by how many people we have here. Although we did see tick up is quits. So as job opportunity becomes easy, people are going to start navigating and make best decisions for themselves. Maybe I'll make $2 more over here. And this is where I see some of the short term of COVID still settling, right? So if I I'm going to school and I'm working at a restaurant and suddenly the restaurant closes, right, and my hours cut by a ton. Maybe I decide over that year I'm gonna go back to school and, change my attitude or change that. Or I decide, wow, there's a lot of jobs available online and I think I could probably make more at an Amazon warehouse. I'm just gonna take that job instead. So you see this shuffling around of people switching positions and trying to find where they can make the most money. And there tends to be a lot of pressure on the low side. So industries that don't have high education thresholds, which they're looking for. So as we're looking at the greater shuffling, like I mentioned, Northern Utah has an unemployment rate of 1.5, Utah's 1.9, that's super low. In December, the last we have recorded, we had 6,350 unemployed people, which includes 1,300 people on unemployment benefits in Northern Utah. And in the last 6 months, we've seen 30,000 jobs posted online. So we're talking about a labor shortage. This is a real problem in bodies. It's not just people not willing to work. It's not people who are like reticent to come back from COVID. Those are impacts, but this is the biggest one. We just don't have enough people. And the parentheses are on the states. On the state side, we have 3,200 people, or 32,000 people unemployed, 5,500 who are on unemployment, and we've seen 150,000 job postings online. So even if everybody who is unemployed and looking for a job today, imagine you had the right skills to get hired and fit into one of these jobs, we still wouldn't cover even half of the positions that we have available. On the right here, I want to point out these are the top job postings in our region. And the interesting thing is a lot of these are middle skill stuff, where as these people with low education, low income are switching around, they have the option of, if I'm putting a restaurant, do I want to go work in a manufacturing plant or do I want to go work in a Walmart stockhouse? Well, Walmart doesn't require me to get any kind of training and they pay about the same. Now, in the long term, you can argue that one's not a career and one is, but I think the difficulty is as they do this reshuffling, a lot of these industries are having a hard time marketing the longevity of the career and getting over the opportunity cost of switching. People switch to what's easiest, what's available, what's right in front of them, and they go and get educated is not fun. So like general medical and surgical hospitals, that's not doctors, that's techs. That's people that you don't need a lot of education to get in there, but you do need some. Same thing with aerospace product and parts manufacturing. You don't just show up. It doesn't take a whole ton of education, but you can't just be there, So all these are industries that are struggling to get people over that hurdle of whatever kind of small education they need to get into this industry, and not generally, 4-year degree type problems. So current concerns, what's stopping us? Inflation and wage gains. So we talked about, we've got high inflation right now, I have some data on that. And then upward wage pressure at the bottom, right? So these jobs that I've been talking about are workers who can flow between industries fairly easily. It doesn't take much for me to switch between food and accommodation, to working at a hotel, to working at a retail store. It doesn't take a lot for me to switch between. Housing affordability is obviously a problem in the long run as people, we just don't have the houses and affordability is going down. And then long-term labor replacement. As I mentioned before, I have some data on this as well, but the long and the short of it is that in the US, we've reached below replacement rate. We just don't have young workers to replace the new. Even in Utah, which has one of the highest replacement rates in the nation, we don't have natural replacement now, getting below 2 kids per parents or per set of parents. And then on top of that, we're changing in how we participate in the labor force. So both of those are kind of adding on to these long-term concerns. So we've seen wage gains. On the right here is from the Pew Research Center. It's wage gains in industries from 2020 until the end of 2021. And it shows the two that are really getting a lot of wage gains are ones that either, this is a soft thing, but they can switch to online really easily, or their utility is increased in an online world, or they're ones where face-to-face, it has a higher cost, right? So accommodation and food services, that was pretty impacted by COVID-19. Information, that's grown a ton during COVID-19. So you see the value of those starting to go up. That's how they interact with us and how we utilize our goods, how we interact with the marketplace has changed. We see that reflected. Down at the bottom, arts, entertainment, and recreation. Across the nation, people just aren't going out to shows that they used to. So response to the demand for that goes down and wages drop. So this is kind of difficult. These wages, for example, I put on the left, industry matters. Then wage gains decrease values tenure and seniority. So as these wage gains go up, you have to pay your new employees more. Your old employees, like say I worked for you for 15 years, this year I'm set to get a raise and I'm gonna go from 48 to 55,000 and you're hiring the new guy at 50. Doesn't give me a lot of reason to stay. There might be another company who's going to pay you a little bit more. So it gets tricky because you're fighting against wage gains, you're fighting against inflation, and you need to try and keep your old employees there. And it's tricky. So I want to point out the money right here. Does it always come down to paying more? Not always. As economists, we use money to measure everything. So money's the metric, right? For me, I went work from home since the pandemic started. I love not commuting down to Salt Lake. I live in Ogden. It was an hour and a half down and an hour and a half up. And if they wanted me to go back, I would say no. I wanted, but if they wanted me to go back and they'd offer me $30,000 for a year, maybe I'd take that hour and a half commute, right? So it's really, the money is measuring these other things. Now, a lot of the stuff has changed, right? And it's hard to explain. Economics measures our preferences within society, and our preferences within society have changed due to COVID over the last 2 years. There's a lot of upset because of that. Affordability housing. So to go through these, this is a housing opportunity index from the National Association of Home Builders. The percentages are what percentage of people in that area could afford the median priced house. And over time, you can see over, since 2012, since they started the data, it's just decreased over time. Ogden-Clearfield is the only one that has that's above the nation, and everybody else, we're getting to where it's difficult to afford houses in the area that you want to live. It's the lowest affordability in Oregon. Keep in mind, areas do matter, like St. George, for example, like big retirement center, obviously. So things like that make an impact. But one of the concerns in northern Utah, there's no information for Logan because it's too small. I was really curious about that one because one of the concerns going forward too is now that telecommuting is kind of detached people from urban centers, the desirability of living in urban centers has decreased, and the ability to work away from where the ability to live away from where you work has increased. And so I am curious to see how that pans out in the next few years with, you can fill up cash and work down in Salt Lake. I don't have to live in Salt Lake. But if I'm working as a manufacturer in Buffalo or Cache or some of these other urban areas, I might start having to compete with housing prices with people who can pay more and are telecommuting somewhere else. So that's going to be one that we're going to struggle with for the next little bit, is trying to get housing for these workers as we've established. We just don't have the bodies. So moving on to the long-term stuff, there's kind of two major things on the older end and on the younger end. On the older end, we've had a massive retirement of baby boomers. So this started in the 2008 recession. We kind of saw it. We saw labor force participation rate drop, and it never came back the way we wanted it to. The recovery in labor force has been disappointing. I have a graph on that in a second. And then the other one is on the young side. The working age population beyond college graduates is shrinking. Over time, proportionally, we're getting more educated. More and more of our people are getting college degrees, which conversely just means there's less people without college degrees looking for a lot of these, high competition, low wage jobs. Or a mismatch, and I'm graduating and I have a 4-year degree, and I'm not finding a job that requires a 4-year degree as an entry to the market. And that young men without a college degree are less likely to participate in the labor force than they used to. We've got average housing sizes increase, or average household sizes increasing for the first time in a long time because people are staying home instead of moving out. So to look at the data on these, really quick too, this is the kind of stuff we get for the census. I'm signed up from theirs. So we've got a whole, problem with getting people in, and the stuff we're getting is that U.S. population grew 0.1% in 2021, slowest rate since the founding of the nation. And then that net international migration is the lowest levels in decades. I know that's a political hot button, but for a long time we did have a flow of workers. And over, since the last 5 or 6 years, that really has tapered down. So this is kind of illustrating that. These are age trees. So each line represents how many people proportionally are that age, starting at the bottom from 0 to 4, little babies, all the way up to 85 and above. And you can see on the left here is we've got our big generation of baby boomers that are just leaving the market and aging out at 25 or at 65, where in general people are less likely to work. And then the bottom, they're trying to be replaced by this generation, which just does not have the size. It's just not big enough. So we've got this hourglass figure here. In Utah, we have this nice Christmas tree. We have a better replacement rate. But it's not like the people are bounded here. Youth are going to go wherever their best opportunity is, and it might not be Utah. So there's no guarantee we're going to keep those people, and they're so needed in other places that they might pay more for them. You can see this. This is the labor force participation drop. So right here, the blue line is what we actually saw in labor force participation from 1990 to about 2008 recession. We saw around 72% labor force participation. And it dropped right after the Great Recession as people decided not to work and couldn't find jobs. But then we expected it to come up to the 72%, and it never did. And this labor force potential rate, essentially what happened is that as people came back to the market, we experienced the slow wave of baby boomers aging out and retiring. So if they had been able to retire over that long time, we would have seen something a lot closer to this green line as people aged out. But what we saw instead was a big drop as people reacted to the market, and then as they came back, it was offset by these other people leaving. For example, in 2008, 11% of our population was over 65. Now here at the end of 2018, we had over 16% of our population over 65. So that stuff changes. On the flip side too, labor force participation rate among youth has dropped. Research has shown that between 16 and 20, the largest factor in this is just school, that they face more pressure in school involvement than they used to, not necessarily that they don't want to work. But this is 16 to 24, so all the way through college. And we can see that we had a much higher labor force participation rate before the 2008 Great Recession. It dropped since, and it's never really quite climbed up to what it used to. And you can see that in 16 to 19, it's even more dramatic, where we dropped from around 60%, and we're sitting around 50, 55. And again, pressure from school. So these are some of, again, those low education, low requirement jobs that we're trying to fill that normally would be filled by youth are less likely to be filled than they used to in the past. The takeaway, labor shortage is real and it's complex. It's not an easy thing. Labor is a commodity. Keep that in mind that, they're selling their labor. They're selling their labor and they're going to find, workers are going to find terms that they find favorable or they're not going to work. And then there's good and bad effects. For employers, this is a tough time. There is really a wage thing going on. If there's 10 engineers and 25 openings, probably not every company is going to get an engineer for that, which is hard. They're going to be paying a lot for it. But remember, the backbone of the free market is people acting in their own best interest. I want this to be the takeaway because every week I'm signed up to so many different economic newsletters, right? I get 6 reasons we have a labor shortage and how you can fix it, what companies can do all this stuff. All those sell really well, but at the end of the day, they're all telling me this story, which is the truth and doesn't change and doesn't sell because it's truth, which suggests that people act in their own best interest. They'll continue acting in their own best interest. And if you look at it in any other terms, in terms of people are lazy, they've got this narrative of blah, 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 it's not helpful. It always boils down to this. So going forward, as we do go through this labor shortage, and there are, some real impacts in these wage gains and inflation and housing, people are going to continue to act in this way and keep this in mind rather than going for easy answers. It's always this kind of stuff. So, any questions?
Hey, great job. We do have questions, though. We have about 5 minutes. If anybody has a question for Matt, I'll bring the mic to you. So you don't have to walk up here and ask or yell. Any questions? Okay, right here.
Thank you for this information. It's been really helpful. What is your thought about the impact of artificial intelligence?
I actually think artificial intelligence is going to be great. For a long time, we've had these concerns about, oh my gosh, automation is replacing blue collar work. AI is going to come in and replace white collar work, and we need it. We need it. We don't have the bodies. So we do need automation. We do need AI, all these things to come and replace these workers just because we don't have the bodies we used to. I also think it's easy to get into a concerned place of, jobs can disappear because of that. But they do. We don't have telephone, whatever, I don't even remember the name. Because they never allowed in my lifetime. Switchboard workers, all that kind of stuff. We don't have, hotels where you used to have a doorman, going servicing the elevator. Technology does change the face of jobs, but it doesn't change the fact that we're going to have jobs. It's just the way that we interact with the market. And I really think, especially because we do have this labor deficit, it's really not as scary as it sounds.
I'm Talinda Larson, Executive Director of UAMI. And this is a pink recession, right? And so how can we address the issue of bringing more women back into the workforce?
A low ball. I think when you're paying, I think to say it's a pink recession is a broad thing. I want to know the statistics that you're referring about in general. I would agree that some of the high impact jobs or jobs that women are very prevalent, But I think that when you're talking about how do we get people back into the market, that's a really tricky thing right now. What I've been trying to push people towards more is that instead of trying to entice people that are not working in the market, you have to create conditions in their life where working becomes favorable, where they want to. Right? And a lot of times this is not the case. When you've decided over COVID that when your partners needs to stay home, it's hard to come back. And what I would, as a company, focus on is capturing these people shuffling around rather than trying to spend money like enticing people in the market. I would love to have this answer on how we can get women in STEM and have all the solutions there. But I think really right now it's you have to change the conditions in your life to where it's worth it. And that's a really tricky thing to do. I think a lot of women are saying, well, because it is what they've decided in their case is the best interest. On a macro scale, is that a problem with society? No idea. I don't want to get, but I think that's where people are, making their choices is their own best interest. So, any other questions?
Great presentation, by the way. I get the sense you're not a behavioral economist, but I did have a couple of questions. One is that what explains the Great Resignation, and is this a one-time thing? And the second thing is I'm in higher education, and at what point does the labor market shortage catch up in terms of the lack of credentialing?
Well, I actually would argue that the labor shortage, lack of credentialing is again kind of a utility thing, right? Because if you look at how many people are graduating with a college degree, we have more people graduating with a college degree than we need, right? And we have 1/3 of college graduates who end up working in their field, and 2/3 who end up working outside their field. And the real cost of college has gone up. And so I think that's kind of a larger problem. In terms of why is the Great Resignation happening, I think when you look at the Great Resignation, people not wanting to work. Utah does have a little bit different of a story than I feel like you hear in a lot of other places. We do have a really strong economy. I think the Great Resignation is factored one by I can make more money somewhere else. And that's easy, why not? And then two, I think there are underlying societal things, like I mentioned, economics kind of measures this kind of stuff where, I pay more for Netflix than I did 10 years ago, but I don't pay more for my health. So there's a distribution in growth that I feel like is not really kept up. And I feel like a lot of this Great Resignation is that it's been high impacted in industries that have received historically low growth. So, and again, this is measuring stuff like, is it worth my afternoon as a high school student to go make, $10 an hour? Really, when I walk away, it's gonna be like $7.50 of that after tax. And instead of doing a sport, which is gonna look better on a college resume, Again, so I think there's a lot of personal choices that leads to societal differences in attitude than we used to have. And it sounds like you might be a behavioral economist. So I'd love to talk to you about that. But yeah, I think, and I honestly, I don't know when we're going to have the gap between college education and where people are graduating change. Honestly, I think there's a lot of miscommunications with people in public education about what the job market looks like afterwards. And I can speak from experience on that. Both my parents are college graduates. It wasn't really a question of whether or not I was going to go to college until I was like 3 years in and realizing I was way in debt. And I was like, why did I do this? And then had to make choices, and it worked out fine. I like where I'm at, but I think a lot of people face that. My sister, for example, faced that, got a 4-year degree, then went back for a 6-month certification in radiology and made more money with that. So I think people are starting to wake up to this. I do think there's a generational difference in this. When you talk to older people about the value of college, it was a very different thing. In real terms, college had different value, and it's different now. So I still think that's obviously a little bit of limbo that needs to get balanced out.
Michael, thank you very much for this. Excuse me.
All right. Good afternoon. I want to thanks for the opportunity that I have to be here. Some of you may or may not know us. So I come from a company called Metro Study. I opened our Metro Study offices here in Salt Lake in 2001. And then in 2018, we merged with another company called Myers Research. And so now we've rebranded to Zonda, and that's our new company name. We've got a great local team here, and our methodology is essentially every 90 days, at the end of each quarter, we drive the streets of every subdivision and we physically inspect every lot. So, we track the housing market very, very close. And that's what I'm really going to talk about this afternoon and give you an idea of what's going on. And they gave me 20 or 30 minutes. I said, well, I can probably stand there and say, hey, in case you don't know, the housing market's basically on fire. So, questions. That's we can probably go from there. But let's talk about a few things. I'm going to talk a little bit about the resale market first, and then how it kind of leads into the new home market. And so one of the things that we're really battling with, right? And again, unless you've been living under a rock, right? You know that we don't have a whole lot of inventory, resale home inventory out there. How this plays into the new home market is it's been kind of an interesting kind of road that we've been on for the last couple of years. And if you remember back in 2018, 2019, you can see that we were running on average somewhere between 7,000 to 8,000 homes on the MLS, just for resale homes. And in 17 and 18, or 18 and 19, did anybody complain about the housing market? right? We had an extremely strong housing market in 18 and 19. There was no complaining about it. But if you look where we are today, right, we're in a completely different market, right? And what we've seen is that inventory levels, you can see that if you kind of go through the time frame, right, when COVID hit, we saw that inventory just completely deplete, right? A lot of people decided that they weren't gonna sell their home because they didn't know what kind of possible recession was coming. We didn't want anybody walking through our homes because we didn't want to spread COVID in our homes, right? And so we've gone through this time frame, and those houses now are not coming back on the market. And so we're continuing to see really, really low inventory levels. One of the things that we've talked about, and that I've talked a little bit about, is the media side of this, right? And it's kind of interesting, if you go back earlier this, mid last year, and you look at our September numbers, right, we had about 3,000 homes that were listed on the MLS. But if you go back to the beginning of the year, we had about 1,500. So if you read anywhere in the newspaper, if you listened to the news anywhere, the media said, hey, inventory has grown 100% since the beginning of the year, right? And so we have to take that into consideration and think, well, what does that 100% mean? Well, that 100% went from 1,500 to 3,000 units, and logically, really realistically, we should have somewhere in that 78,000 home on the MLS there. And so the good side, right, this is kind of the double-edged sword. The good side is that we're selling homes fast, right? The good side is that if you have a house and you're listing that house, you get a lot of money for it. The downside is if you're trying to buy that house, housing is getting extremely expensive, right? We're still not, I go back to this inventory level and you look at what we have on the market right now, we have a half a month, right? Basically 0.4 months. So we've got a couple weeks of inventory sitting on the MLS, and this has had a massive impact on the new home side. And this will continue to have actually a positive impact on the new home side, because we're really not expecting this inventory to grow a whole lot, right? Most people now that have been in their homes, or we have a lot of people in our housing stock right now, the people have been in their homes for 10, 15, going on 20 years. And they're not, because of housing costs right now, are not really looking forward to moving that house, right? We got interest rates going up, and the majority of our housing stock now is sitting on a 2.5% or 3% interest rate. And so who wants a crappy 4% interest rate? That's awful, right? That's a joke, in case anybody didn't get that, right? Most of us in this room, right, have been 7, 8, 10, 15, 18% interest rates, right? So that interest rate of 2.5% or 3% is phenomenal, right? But for those that are sitting on that, it doesn't really benefit us to see a whole lot of movement there. So we're really starting to see, or expecting to see, that inventory level stay pretty low. So let's go into the new home side, and this is the stuff that we track very, very close. It's not building permits an actual start, right? So when we look at an actual start, that means a builder has either dug a hole or they poured a slab for that foundation. And you can see where we've been over time, right? You can see the last run up we had of almost 18,000 starts in the whole greater Salt Lake market, right? And so basically this market that we cover here is the Wasatch front and back, 7 counties. And so that's what these numbers will encapsulate here. And so we've gone through the recession. You can see the depths of the recession. We were starting right around 4, maybe 45 or so 100 homes in a year. And then you've come back in this last run-up that we've had in the last couple of years. And we ended 2021 with 19,500 starts. So we are now entering a new territory that this market has never been in. We've never started this many homes in the life of Utah, right? We're pushing over, just going to be pushing 20,000 homes. And if you look on the right-hand side there, new home starts are up 25% from last year, and closings are up about 6.5%. So one of the things that we continue to talk about, and questions that I get, is that gap, right? We always look for that gap between starts and closings. And if that gap starts to grow, we start to get really nervous, right? That means we're going to have a whole bunch of inventory come on the ground. But the difference that we're dealing with right now, especially in the housing market, is that we don't have a problem starting a home, right? We don't have a problem digging a hole. We don't have a concrete shortage. And so builders are able to start construction on a house. So we started. The problem is, once we've dug that hole, once we poured the foundation of the slab, that's when the delays start, right? And so once that's started, the framers are pushed back 2 to 3 weeks, and then the plumbers are another 2 to 3 weeks back, and then the HVAC is pushed back, and the electrical is pushed back. And so all of these trades, right, like what Michael was talking about with this labor shortage that we have, it has hit the housing market just as, if not harder than any industry out there. And so that gap is growing because we can't finish a house. And so builders have literally been starting those homes, but because that construction time keeps increasing, they're not able to close. My mother-in-law is building a house right now. She put that house under contract about 9 months ago, pushing almost, I guess about 10 months ago. They just finished framing that house last month. So, and she's not alone, right? It's not like she's in a special, different situation, but this is happening all the time. And so when we break it down, we just look at each one of our counties, right? We can see a lot of where the growth is occurring. Now, 40% of our new home starts in the greater Salt Lake market is just in Utah County, right? Mike also pointed something out, this migration, right? And this work from home option. And that's benefiting, especially our markets up here, right, in northern Utah, because everybody is not commuting to work every single day, right? We have this work from home option now. We have plenty of people that are either working from home or they're commuting to the office 1 or 2 days a week. And so this allows our housing market now to expand, right? We don't need all of that housing just downtown. We don't need all of that housing within, a 5 or 10 minute commute of our employment hubs. And so we're going to continue to see these markets grow, outside of what we've normally seen for some time. Again, let me skip that. So one of the other things that I talked a lot about, and one of the things that we watched very, very close in this market is the product that we're building, the type of houses that we're building. And as you can see, we are primarily building detached single-family homes, right? That's been the largest part of our production for a very, very long time. Again, you can see kind of the changes that have occurred in this market over the last few decades. And again, what you're seeing there, if you look all the way to currently, right, as of 2021, almost 40% of our new home starts are for attached product. And in our methodology, that doesn't even include apartments. So this is just for sale housing, right? So your attached product is basically your townhomes, your condos, right? Duplexes, anything that is for sale. So this is partly how we're getting to and trying how we're getting to mitigate some of that affordability issue, right? The only way you can kind of tackle affordability is to build a smaller lot, higher density, right? And you can see some of that product. So the interesting thing is that when you kind of look at each one of the markets, right, each one of our counties, you can see kind of that level of attached product that we're building. And the majority of our product, or majority of our counties, obviously kind of around that 30-40%. The interesting thing, if you look at Salt Lake County, Salt Lake County is now over 50%. So 50% of our new home starts just in Salt Lake County is attached product. And if I ask most of you, where is that attached product built? Most of you are going to say, well, it's probably that downtown. It's maybe in the Murray, Midvale product, areas. The majority of this is in the Riverton area, the South Jordan area, the Harriman area, right? It's not just downtown product anymore. This product is continuing to grow and out in a lot of our suburban areas. The other thing I always like to look at too is just where are we building that product, at what price point? And this is a 16-year history of the market, and really takes a look at, in what segment of these price ranges are we building these houses in each start. And if you obviously go back to 2006, 2007, you'll see there that 68% of our homes in 2006 were built under $350,000, and today only 15% of that is built under $350,000. Right? Our middle segment there was 19% from 350 to 500, and now it's down to it's up to 46%. So that's continuing to grow. And then the big portion there, above $500,000 homes, was 13% of our production in 06, and now it's pushing almost 40%. Right? So again, there's this affordability issue that we continue to talk about, and it's very hard to tackle. Right? Most of you probably have some sort of neighbor that has only lived in Salt Lake. You lived in this market for 5 minutes, right? Because they're coming from California, they're coming from back east, right? Because of this whole work from home concept that we continue to see and continue to have benefit the market, right? We're seeing just a ton of those people move in here with a lot of equity. the Utah market, right, the Greater Salt Lake market has been a pretty affordable market for a very long time. And so, we're continuing to see a lot of people sell their 1,500 square foot mansion in California for, $1 million or $2 million. And they bring all of that equity here, and you can buy a lot of house here for $600,000, $700,000, $800,000. Well, you could a couple of years ago, I don't know, not much anymore, but. So in northern Wasatch, in Weber and Davis County, there's our starts and closings number there. It's a similar gap, right? So we continue to see the same gap, and we're about a 20% gap between the starts and closings. But one of the things, again, you're starting to see the closings just start to taper off just a little bit. Normally, when I talk to a bunch of bakers in the room, you can see their hair start to stand up and they get really, really nervous. And so I have to settle everybody down and say, okay, this is not a negative thing, right? It's okay that the closings are starting to taper off or flatten off a little bit. And starts are still growing for the most part, right? Again, we're still building. And as we look at inventory levels, we'll show you why this is still a good thing, right? Why we're not too nervous about this gap. The other thing we continue to talk about, right, and everybody keeps talking about is just housing prices. And there's good and bad with this. When you look back over time, right, over the last few years, you can see a very, very consistent increase in our average price points. And so the overall market, we're running, we're averaging somewhere around that 18 to maybe 20% increase in a base new home price from last year at the same time. And then you can see Davis County, we're at 580,000, it's up 15%. Weber County, we're at 504, and it's up 15%. So yes, prices are increasing, and a lot of that is driven just by demand. A lot of that is driven just by material costs, just by labor costs, right? All of these things are continuing to impact this. But if I took this graph, I didn't show it, but I have another graph that I show all the way back to the 2002 timeframe. And the difference is the Greater Salt Lake market grew, our housing price grew about $150,000, $170,000 from 2002, 2003 timeframe to 2005. So it took us about 3 years in the last run-up to see about $150,000 or $170,000 price increase in this market. The nice part is it took us about a decade, from about 2010, 11 timeframe to about 2020 timeframe. The average house grew, the average home price grew about $150,000. So this market was very elastic for a very long period of time. So yes, we saw prices grow, but for 10 years, it was a very steady 2 to 3 to 4% growth rate. And then just in the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen that house price grow another $150,000. So the last couple of years has not been as positive for buyers, but again, our prices have been very much impacted by that outside home buyer that's bringing all that money in. So the other thing that we look really closely at is just inventory, right? And we look at new home inventory. Again, this is the part of the big driver that we're seeing with the new home starts and then of course prices. So you can see what we have under construction, that gray bar, right? We've got 13,000 homes that are under construction right now. And that's up almost 60% from last year. It's about a total of about 11 months of supply for new home inventory. And then you see we've got 10 and a half months of under construction. So our equilibrium for that under construction should be between kind of that 4 to maybe 6 months time frame, because that's about the same amount of time it takes us to build a house. But if there's any builders in the room that are building houses in 4 to 6 months, please raise your hand. I would love to see that, because it's probably getting very, very difficult. So the most important number that we watch is that blue line, right? The blue bars there, which is our finished vacant inventory. It's our spec home inventory. And so this is one thing that tells us it helps us judge the health of the market. So if you go back to the recession, you can see that we had about 35 or so hundred finished vacant homes in the market. And at the time we kind of peaked out there at about 4 months. Well, over on the right-hand side now, you can see that we have less than 650 finished vacant spec homes in the entire Greater Salt Lake market. So Wasatch front and back, we've got 650 spec homes, basically. And that is a 0.5 months of supply. So our equilibrium for that finished inventory should range between about 2 and 2.5 months. So you can see how low our finished vacant inventory is. And this is not a new phenomenon, right? This is not a new trend. You can see that our finished vacant inventory has been running below 2 months of supply for about the last 5 to almost 6 years. And so, and there's many of our biggest builders in this market that are building 100% of their product is on spec, right? They're not taking contracts until that home is almost finished. So even with 10, probably even more, right, 15 to maybe 30% of our production right now is 100% spec build. We're still not even growing that spec inventory. There again, you can see the prices in each one of those segments. So 58% of our homes, of our new homes that are under construction are above that $450,000 mark. So again, you can see how that's changed, right? And that segment is still up over 100% from last year. But if you look at the spec home side, right, this finished vacant side, that inventory, not one of our segments is over 1.1 months. So even in the very highest end of over $800,000 homes, which is normally a higher rate, right? It usually takes us more than a month or two to sell a custom spec home. We barely have a month's supply there. So this number is always kind of our canary in the coal mine, right? It tells us what the market's doing. And so this is why the market is continuing to stay just so strong. The nice part is that the builders are very reactive right now, right? There are a lot of the builders that were building back in the recession don't want to go back to those times, right? And so they're building and they're developing very differently than they did in the past. And so they're operating with much less inventory. And you can see back in 18 and 19 there, we started to get a little more finished inventory on the ground. And so I've heard builders say, man, we've been sitting on this house for an extra day or an extra week or maybe a week and a half. I'm really nervous about the market. And I'm saying, well, how long did it take you to sell a house back in 12 or 11 or 14 or 15? And it was like, well, we usually kept it for a month or two. So I keep saying, well, if you're sitting on a spec home for an extra couple of days, it's really not a bad thing, right? There again, you look at, this is the other thing that is pretty interesting to look at when you look at the last 16 years. So there again, this is your finished vacant inventory in each one of those price segments. Look at the amount of finished inventory that we had right back in 2006. So 56% of our finished vacant spec home inventory was under 350, and today we have 14%. 350 to 500, it was 24, now it's 37%, and then there again, almost 50% of that spec home inventory today is over $500,000. So we're just not the same market that we used to be, right? We're not the same Utah that we used to be. We're having a lot of money moved in here, bringing a lot of equity, a lot of cash with them, but we also have really strong wage growth here, right? We are creating much better jobs here. We have a lot of jobs here that people are working out of state, right? They're able to bring that cash here. So the other thing that I want to focus on too is, and part of the driver here is our lot inventory, right? So you look at how many lots we have on the ground, and a VDL in our methodology means vacant developed lot, right? Those are finished lots. So we have about 19,000, almost 20,000 lots today on the ground, right? So if you're a builder in the market, you're kind of thinking in your back of your mind, well, where are those lots? So I really need some lots. I really want some of those lots. Well, if you break those down and look at that lot inventory a little bit closer, if you take out the lots that are in master plan communities, subdivisions that have less than 5 lots in them, and you take out the lots that production builders own, because they don't sell lots, that leaves us with about 26% of that 19,000 lots that's actually available to a builder to go purchase. And 85% of that 26% of those 3,500 lots are for homes above $500,000 or $150,000 lot, right? So if you're a custom builder, this works really well for you. You have to pick a handful of lots, but if you're a smaller builder or building more affordable type product, there's virtually no lot inventory out there for you to pick from. And then one of the other things that I always like to look at very close is that we track all the future lots, right? Everything that's going through the entitlement process, and then also of that, so we've got about 180 lots that are in the entitlement process in all the cities across the market. But if you look over on the right-hand side, we've got about 19,000 lots that are actually under development. So we barely have a year's supply of lots that are being developed. And then if you break this down and look at that same, similar picture there, for lot inventory versus the pipeline, majority of our submarkets have maybe barely enough lots to sustain the lot inventory that they currently have, right? So if we've got less than a year's supply of lot inventory on the ground, you can see the pipeline of lots under development is still pretty small. So there's very little chance for this market to get overbuilt in the very immediate future, right? Unless something major happens to this market. So, our forecast really, you can kind of see where we've been over the last, couple decades almost basically. And you can see that we're now headed into territories that this market's never been, right? We're pushing into 20,000 plus new home starts on an annual basis, is what we're forecasting here in the next couple of years. Again, back to some of what Michael was talking about, that's also driven by jobs, right? It's also predicated on us creating enough jobs and allowing people to stay in this market and continue to work in this market so that they can afford some of our homes. We've kind of flattened that forecast just a little bit. So one of the things that we're starting to see, again, this is not a bad thing, right? Most of the builders that we work with and talk with often are really kind of hoping for that number, right? They really actually want that number to kind of settle down because business is so crazy right now. It is so busy that they're having a really hard time just keeping caught up, right? And building at a normal time frame. And so this is welcome to most people. So, as you look at kind of the factors of this market, some of the positive side, the negative side, and Michael touched on it, and I would, Natalie will probably touch on these as well, but the majority of the things that are the headwinds that we're facing right now, a lot of them are completely out of our control, right? We can't control supply chains. We can't really afford affordability. We certainly can't control inflation. We can't really control the media, the labor constraints, right? Those things are really hard for us to control. And so, some of those things are going to affect the market. But if you look at some of the strengths, the list of strengths that we have, and we could probably put this list of strengths even more, and we could have a couple pages of strengths on here. But again, we've got phenomenal job growth in the market. We still have interest rates that are very low. This year, we're going to see a lot of the fence sitters, right? A lot of those people that have been sitting on the fence looking to buy a home. When we start talking about interest rates and somebody hears that the Federal Reserve is going to increase interest rates, that's going to push them into the housing market because they want to get in before prices go up and before interest rates go up again. We've still got a really low inventory, so especially on the resale side, that's going to continue to push on the new home side. And then, this whole work from home. So, the housing market is really, really strong. Again, not a new phenomenon that I need to tell anybody, but the future of our housing market continues to be very bright, right? We have a lot of great drivers to push us, and we should continue to see some pretty strong growth, but we've got to make some really good decisions about affordability and about density. I think are the two of the biggest things that we'll need to tackle. So hopefully that's helpful. Thanks for your time. I appreciate you having me.
Questions? Any questions for Eric? Okay, right back here. Only easy questions. I'm going to take easy questions now. You gotta sit the way back of the room, didn't you?
So Scott Heston, planning director for Ogden City. Just wondering what you think, the last two bullet points you said, we should think about affordability, we should think about density. We've got municipal partners in the room. What can cities do you think, that will actually affect affordability? Is this a question that's coming down to what we can do as administrators and policymakers to help impact this?
So that's a great question. I'll try to say this politically correct as best as I can. So there are, I think, a lot of ways that the cities can help, and part of one of the biggest issues right now that we have with getting affordable product is some of it is out of the city's control because they're just so backed up. Right, so the time that it takes a project to get entitled, by the time that builder developer brings that project to the city and gets the approvals, the timeframe takes so long now. It used to take us about 12, maybe 18 months for a developer from the time that they bought the dirt to the time that they started building, to get through entitlements, get development process. And now that time is doubled, right? So we're looking at least 18, 24 months timeframe for us to get that project through the entitlement process. And so in the meantime, that dirt continues to get more expensive and prices on homes continue to get more expensive in that 2-year timeframe. And so, if we can speed up that process, that will help immensely. The other piece is just looking at the more affordable or the higher dense product. I think this has been a major issue for this market. And it really, we haven't really had to deal with high dense property or projects up until maybe the last decade or so. Because of affordability. And so the problem that the cities have, if anybody of you have attended a city meeting, there's a big difference between the city meeting you attended about 10 years, 15 years ago, when it was essentially you as the builder, developer, kind of trying to take that project through the entitlement process, and then a scout troop, right, that had to be there for a merit badge, right? That was kind of, it was you and them that were in that meeting. And if you go to a city council meeting today, you got almost every single homeowner within a 2-mile radius of that new project that shows up, and they're all demanding, no, we don't want this housing, it's gonna ruin our neighborhood, high density is high crime, right? And so that's part of the biggest part of I think our problem right now is allowing that pushback for that product, because we do need, high density housing is not high crime product, right? It doesn't mean that the bad people are buying all of this high density product. For those of you that have kids, I have 4 of them, and 3 of them are at the home buying age. My son is in the process of buying a townhome as we speak. And if he didn't have a townhome, guess where he lives? Yeah, in my basement, right? For a longer period of time. He's been there long enough. He needs to go. So we have to have this product, and developers are doing a much better job of building much better high dense products, townhomes, small lot product in today's world than we did 15, 20 years ago.
Eric, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Let's give him a hand. You hear? Okay, when Natalie's walking up, I'll just stand up for 20 seconds just to shake it out while she's walking up here, and that way it'll be high energy when Natalie speaks to you. So, Eric, look.
Thank you, Roger, for getting everybody to stand up. I think that's great. I'm delighted to be with you today and have prepared a message that's a little bit more philosophical. I hope that will be well received. I will say that Michael and Eric have set the stage really well by sharing so much local, rich data about our times. We live in a really extraordinary time. And I have struggled to find the right words, the right message to bring to you today. I could come and really brag on the Utah economy. Those of you that are watching the economic data know that we have a lot to stand up and be proud about. But I'm not going to do that. I will talk about some of the great things happening in the economy, but I wanted to really talk about sort of the disquieted, troubling time that we're in. And with my goal being to make you think, to share a compelling message of the task that lies ahead. So that's kind of where we're going. And as I do that, I want to thank Bank of Utah for the invitation to be here. It's a fabulous bank, and I've gotten to know the Bank of Utah better over the last few years, and I really enjoy the chance to be a part of this forum. So I asked you to think of a word that described 2022, 2021. I don't know, maybe these are some of the words you think. Divided, people are a bit anxious, maybe there's some frustration. Maybe you feel emboldened, maybe you're really excited because we're about through or potentially with this pandemic. For some, maybe the word's hopeful, and I count myself among people that feel that way. But I'm really feeling all of these and more. And I'm highly motivated, even as I'm feeling this uncertainty, that we can achieve a better future, that we can do more. And I'm particularly bullish on Utah and on the Ogden region and other areas in the state. So this is a complicated mix that I'm going to pull together for you. So I really thought hard about doing this next slide that I'm going to show you, but I think it's really helpful. And I don't want you to get too frustrated that it's such a Debbie Downer, okay, just a warning. But I'm gonna show you a letter to the editor, that an editor-in-chief wrote from The Week magazine, William Falk. I love his writing, and I'm gonna actually read this to you. It takes 2 slides to read it, but it'll set the stage nicely. And I'm gonna quote Speaker Wilson to get us to a little more hopeful state. So William Falk writes, this is on December 31st of 2021, so as we're starting this year. He said, "This is a dark time and a dark year. It began horribly with a violent assault on the Capitol intended to stop the peaceful transfer of power, a first for our nation. The climate," he means climate change here, "the climate showed us where we're headed as biblical droughts baked the West and sucked reservoirs dry. 115-degree heat waves paralyzed Portland and Seattle, and a polar cold snap froze Texas solid. Forests in the western U.S. exploded into flames. Monstrous tornadoes that are almost never seen in December erased communities across Kentucky and the Midwest. The pandemic we thought we'd beaten in the spring roared back twice through Greek-lettered, mutation-disguised variants that have filled hospitals and morgues with voluntarily unvaccinated. In this season of renewal and hope, it takes real effort to find optimism about the future in our sour, beleaguered hearts." Now, he's a good writer, isn't he? And you may agree with some of this, may disagree with some of this, but this is a sentiment that's being expressed. So he ends the letter by saying, "We can reasonably hope the pandemic will wane this year at last." There's the hope. "After holding humanity hostage for more than 2 years. But there's no reason to expect an end to another viral epidemic of misinformation and tribal hatred that endangers our democracy. Americans no longer share common facts, information, or trusted sources and experts. The extremists on both sides are pushing the parties further apart, and on the right, a radical anti-democracy movement is gaining momentum. 3 retired U.S. generals warned this week that a disputed presidential election in 2024 could cause, quote, a total breakdown of the chain of command along party lines and actual civil war. If that sounds nuts, remember that 2 years ago, an insurrection and a pandemic were just as unimaginable. In the face of so many troubles and sorrows, what can we do? For perspective, I often think back to what my parents' generation faced and how dark it must have felt as 1941 gave way to 1942. Then, as now, surrender was not an option. And then he says, "Curse the darkness, fight, persist, the light is coming eventually." Okay, now, I hesitated to read that to you or to share it, but I thought it set a really good stage. You may not agree with everything that was said. There's certainly some hard things that weren't mentioned, and there's some great things that were mentioned. But I want to make a juxtaposition to what our House Speaker, Brad Wilson, said at the opening day of the Utah legislature. And he said this. He said, "It is said the pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects it to change, and the realist adjusts the sail." Later in his remarks, he said, "With deliberation, with cooperation, and with determination, we can create a future we all want. Let's be bold as we chart the Utah way." And then he says, "Forward." And it was interesting to me how the last, writer ended with "eventually," and Speaker Wilson's ending with "forward." And so I share that with you as a way to just kind of set the stage for where I want to go next, and that is I want to break some bread with you. And I created a little metaphor here, and it's a warm winter stew. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this pot and I'm going to put all these seasonings and ingredients and things inside this pot and think about this way forward and juxtapose this trying time with this really best-in-class state, best-in-class communities like Ogden, and think about what's the way forward, where are we heading? Now, just a little humorous moment. We have a graphic designer that we work with that Kempsey Gardner calls his to help me make some of these designs. And I told him I wanted to do a warm winter stew. And this was the first version he gave me. I could give it in my outline and everything. And I'm like, no, sorry, you misread where I was going with this. But it seemed to be kind of a funny metaphor that there's also this winter stew. All right. Well, so like any good stew, there's some chefs that I paid attention to, and this is kind of the reading list that I paid attention to. It includes a lot of great authors and magazines. You'll see Arthur Brooks there with his Loving Your Enemies, Patriotic Grace, Peggy Noonan, The Soul of America, John Meacham, A Time to Build, Yuval Levin, Apollo's Arrow. This is the great piece on the pandemic that's been written. And so these are where some of the ideas that I'm going to share with you come from. And the thinking is that this warm stew will bring us comfort. And it will also pull together a lot of ingredients that will help us make sense of our world. And gratefully, this stew is made in Utah. And so this is our pot right here. And I think that the fact that it's made in Utah will give it some optimism that perhaps William Faulkner can have. So the recipe includes the following: history and what lies ahead, a dose of business intelligence, some guiding principles, and strategies to succeed. There's also some seasonings. And my seasonings are going to be, I'm going to be really quick with these, but socioeconomic disparities, housing shortage, great resignation, and something that Putnam calls IEI. So let's start cooking and start with these seasonings. And I'm going to start with us thinking about this notion of socioeconomic disparities and what you might think of as bounty and spread. This is from the book, The Second Machine Age. It shows different, it's an interesting y-axis to kind of show these things together, but it's basically showing wages by different education levels. And if you look early on, you can see the more highly educated, the higher your wage, but everybody's wage was increasing. Then you can see a period in the 70s where they kind of just moved sideways. And then in 1982, Time Magazine declared the personal computer the person of the year. And the disparities started to sort of flash out, right? Because the economy started to award or reward people with education levels in the information age, and started to not reward people without. And we have considerable evidence of declining income inequality. This is from the Putnam work of IEI over time, but you can see rising levels of equality and then declining levels of equality. So this is a seasoning that's in our pot. We also have a seasoning about a housing shortage, housing crisis, however you want to think of that. And Eric did a really nice job just thinking through and presenting that. And I'm not going to belabor this, but the Gardner Institute does a lot of research in this front. These are skyrocketing home prices in Utah. You can see how they don't always appreciate. In the red is where they're not, but you can see where we're at in the record year that we just had. You can see the historic low mortgage interest rates. We think that's about to change, obviously. And then we've got rents. You can see here the Salt Lake City metro area with making the list of skyrocketing rents. And then the way that we've really documented the shortage by comparing new households formed to new households created. You see here the different decades, 70s, 80s, 90s, and aughts. And the dark black is going to be the new housing units created, and the red are the new housing units formed. And you see how we're always creating more supply than we need, so we've got a healthy market, it's working. But you come to the current decade, and I'll let you kind of just look at that, but you can see how we start out the decade by not building enough. And then that line below shows the shortage accumulating. So we now think that we're about 45,000 units short in the state of what would be a healthy market. Eric, are you somewhere close to that? Yeah, okay. So we got this housing shortage, and then at least in our measures of median days on the market, down to 6. All right, so that seasons our pot, right? We're making a stew together, what's in it. It's been mentioned so much, and I thought that Michael did a super job just talking about the labor market and retiring boomers. I'm going to show you the data this way. This is US data, but you can see this is the percent of the US labor force, not in labor force and don't want a job. And you see the red line of the 55 and older and just shooting up. It's a really interesting phenomenon. My personal opinion is that this is the people who have their savings, have their investments, have home ownership. They've accumulated their wealth and they're just done. And they have that choice. And they just have departed the labor market, and not likely that we'll get them back anytime soon. So that certainly seasons where we're headed. Okay, now I want to talk about some one last seasoning, and it's what's called IVI. And if you like this, go read the book called The Upswing. But this is really a book about all these measures of societal, political, economic measures and cultural measures. And it goes all the way back to the 1880s to the present, and measures all these indicators of how much do we cooperate. It starts in really the Gilded Age, takes you all the way to the peak, which is when Eisenhower was president after World War II, and then takes us to where we are today. And these researchers have this stunning finding that this same trend, when they aggregated all these measures, were the same for culture, society, politics, and economics. And it's called the I on this end, the we in the middle, and the I at the end, the I, we, I. And this is just a really interesting thing, that we're not cooperating at levels that we once did. And that's a really bad time for a pandemic to hit, just saying. All right, so those are the seasonings. So now I've got ingredients that I'm gonna put in the pot. And I mentioned that one of the ingredients is just the history and the context that we're in. I'm really fond of the quote that context is like water to a dolphin. Like it's everything. And right now we're in a complicated time, a fluid time. We have known knowns, known unknowns, unknown unknowns. And I just put a few of these on the list here, but just think about what we have coming in. Whatever's going to happen in Ukraine, whatever's going to happen with the Fed, their policy decisions, do they get it right? The SCOTUS appointment, how much turmoil does that end up causing? The Roe v. Wade decision, how much turmoil does that cause? And then midterm elections. And that's just taking us through November. So this is why I wanted to be philosophical today. All right, so if I'm looking at these ingredients and taking a little bit deeper dive, I'm looking at population growth, job growth, and economic diversity. And the population growth, and this is where Utah's going to really start to shine as we do this, but you see it's the fastest growing state. We grew by 18.4% between 2010 and 2020. Some of you will say, well, we're always the fastest growing state. Not really true. We're always in like the top 5. Sometimes Nevada gets us, sometimes Arizona gets us, sometimes Iowa gets us, but for the past decade, we claim it and have it in a rich way. If we look at our most recent history of jobs, so this is just showing you in gray is a job change for the US, red is Utah, and you can just see what some would think of as a V-shaped recovery in the pandemic, but you can see what we've just been through and how tumultuous it was. But as we come out of it, and as Michael mentioned, using the 2-year standard, so 2019 pandemic, 2022 or 2021, so 2019 to 2021, we just take the pandemic out of it, just compare the growth rates between 2019 and 2021, and we end up having the fastest growing economy in the country by some margin. And if you look at this, you'll see that most of the country still not recovered to 2019 levels. See all those negative numbers? It's really just Idaho and Utah and I believe Texas, Arizona that show this claim. Our economic recovery right now is broad-based. Again, this is using the 2-year 2019 to 2021 measures, but you can see how rapidly growing construction is. That's why we're getting all these new homes built. And you can see very strong growth in financial activity. You can see it in manufacturing. And really, the only two industries that have really shown a lot of struggle continue to be the leisure, hospitality, or tourism sector, and then the mining sector, which has got a lot going on. If I show you just this, population growth by county, you can kind of look at it here. I'll let you peek at what Weber County is doing, both in absolute change and then also the percent change. And then if we look at the county share of growth, look over here, Weber County is about 5% of the state's growth in 2021. And you can see when Bank of Utah takes this message to Utah County, we're going to talk a lot about Utah County because Utah County is a very dominant place right now. And then in terms of just my, looking at the context, the diversity of Utah's economy is really important. Another place where we shine, where we have a mix of industries that make us very stable. This is a Hockman index. It really measures how similar is the makeup of Utah's economy to that of the nation. If we're similar to the nation, we say we're diverse, and we are. All right, so a few more ingredients. Now I'm going to go to talking about what I just termed business intelligence. So you're all here. You are, customers, you're citizens, your community leaders, and you've got all this income. So I'm just saying all this business intelligence that's coming in, and it's a handful, right? You've got things happening with the supply chain. You have these imminent rate hikes. We have this sting of inflation going on. We certainly have social unrest. There's so much more that I'm not including there. But that's what I'm meaning by business intelligence. All of this incoming. We could take this and put it on a risk matrix. We could say, what's the severity of it and what's the likelihood of it? And I've got in red the two things that are of greatest concern as I'm making this stew, and that is any Federal Reserve missteps, and if the pandemic became a black swan event in the coming year, where all of a sudden a more virulent, mutation, variation of the virus hit us in some way that was very troubling. So those are the real things, but you can see the uncertainty that we're confronting. When we talk about inflation, most economists will start by showing the stress in the global supply chain. And it's gotten almost like, I don't know how to describe it, but like a comedy, right? You order something and 5 months later you get it when it was supposed to get here in 10 days kind of thing, and you're grateful that it came. The stress of the supply chain is raising costs and creating a very inflationary environment on the supply side. So here's what inflation looks like, giving a lot of history, so you can see that we get a lot of variation in inflation, but you can see the situation we're in right now, where we have both rate costs that are rising, largely because of a broken supply chain, and then we have excess money because of stimulus, so on the demand side, creating this very tricky time. I'm going to show you a chart here that you may or may not agree with. This is what the Fed thinks is going to happen. You may or may not agree with it, but it shows the inflation and then it shows the forecast. I'd love all of you to just take bets and decide whether you think by the end of this year you're going to get inflation in check or you're closer to the target. And then we've got all this stimulus. And the top bar is the dot-com stimulus from the federal government. The mid is the Great Recession, and then the pandemic's the bottom one, approaching 25% of gross domestic product. Just a stunning, a bit of investment in the economy, whether you agree with it or not. So the last kind of thing I want to do in this stew is just cover what I'm going to call some guiding principles in the ingredients and then some strategies. And the hope is that by putting this stew out there in the Q&A, we can talk a little bit more about what this means. So I've come up with 3 guiding principles. Practice warm-heartedness. Guiding principles, by the way, are things we live by. Respect facts and deploy reason, and seek balance. And I've got a quote for each of them. Arthur Brooks, in his book, Love Your Enemy, asked the Dalai Lama, he said, "Your Holiness, what do I do when I feel contempt?" And the Dalai Lama said, practice warm-heartedness. And I think that's pretty good guidance for us in this time. The second one was respect facts and deploy reason. And in this one, I got John Meacham saying there is such a thing as discernible reality. Like, we really do know certain things. We know that the temperature of the earth is rising. We may not agree with what to do about it, but it's a discernible fact that it is. We know that taxes stifle innovation. I can show you a lot of research on that. We know that levels of anxiety are up. You know, these are discernible facts. And so that's a good place to start within our guiding principles. And then to seek balance, my boss, President of the University of Utah, Taylor Randall, said that when you focus on one problem, you lose perspective. And this is really sort of the Utah way in thinking about the pandemic, because in Utah, we chose to think about our economy and the pandemic. And that's where we got so much balance in our approach. Okay, last thing is just strategies. And I've broken it down to strategies. Prepare for an economic resorting. Take care of yourself and your people. Care for those, well, I'm gonna say care for those left behind, and then invest in institutions. And I'm really interested in questions here. And so I'm gonna go really quick here and just give you my thinking. But the economic resorting deals with all of these structural changes, whether they're demographic, technological, behavioral, that we're going to have. And so be prepared for it. Work from home is real. Zoom towns, the Ogden Valley, real. You know, be prepared for this resorting. And I just got data here, and we can show these slide decks that show the outmigration from urban centers. So this is that people can go work elsewhere, but still hold their jobs in urban centers. I'm asking the question, as part of resorting, are asset prices overblown? And so we look at some data that kind of looks at an economy-wide price to earnings ratio. Another one is to take care of yourself and our people. We did some data on mental health issues in our state. This was focused on our young people, but every measure you can see how it doesn't look good. Our people are suffering. Care for those left behind. We have data that shows that the education system during the pandemic has disadvantaged students who are not where they used to be. And you can see the deficits that we find and that we measure. And then finally, I mentioned invest in institutions, and I just want to share some data here. This is the partisanship in presidential approval. If you look at the y-axis, it's own party approval minus other party approval. But we're in a state of incredible division politically. Here is the growth in the emptying pews and the multiplying nuns. So this is religious activity. You can see how it's declining because the nuns are going up and whatnot. And just a basic decline in society's institutions. And I'm just helping to remind us, what are these institutions? It's the Supreme Court, it's the media, it's education, it's the things that we count on to have civilized society. And as they're in decline, this is Yuval Levin's work, we see people, instead of molding things, they use them as platforms. Instead of, as you see at the bottom there, instead of being formative, we become performative. Think of Congress and the way that they conduct themselves. Sometimes they seem like they're performing rather than the converse. Okay, so that is our warm winter stew. And if I didn't quite say it enough, I wanted to emphasize that to me, that's the stew that we're in. But I want to completely emphasize that Utah and the Ogden region are better positioned than really almost anywhere in the country to navigate this, like our speaker said, to set ourselves and succeed. There's a lot of challenges that remain, but I think we've got some reason for hope. And with that, we're going to love this last slide. Bon appetit. And let's take some questions. Thank you so much. Feel free to take this anywhere you want. And I think we have maybe 10 minutes or so.
Thank you.
was curious, what do you think the impact of China's real estate market is going to affect the United States and how that's going to play out?
So, on that little timeline where I was sort of saying context matters, and I have like China in the past and I have China in the future, I think China just looms large in every sense. Even the Olympics being there in a few days with a population that basically has no immunity to this virus, that's going to be interesting, right? And then you've got the whole Taiwan China thing, and then all of our chip makers are in Taiwan. And then you have a China that's struggling and working through its economic challenges right now. So I think that it looms large, and it's something we should all be very vigilant and pay attention to, including the real estate aspects. Okay, another question.
I have one.
Okay,
I got the mic, so I'm gonna ask it. My question is, now that housing prices are going up, cost of labor in Utah is not what it used to be, it's gone up dramatically. Transportation, you look at freeways and highways, it's a lot harder to get around, although they're trying to do something about it. How in the next 5 to 10 years will that affect the growth of the Utah economy and people coming to Utah, businesses coming in here, because now we're looking more like the rest of the nation?
Yeah. Well, so growth, we like to say, is our constant companion here in Utah. Our population growth rates were higher in the 90s than they are today. So our historical average rate was 2/3 last year. So, does that continue? My reading of sort of the macroeconomic forces is that we're going to continue to be a place that attracts labor. That we're going to continue to be a place that people want to be. That wouldn't be the case if we weren't investing so mightily in taking care of this growth. You saw the economic data, how much better we performed in the nation economically through the pandemic. But guess what? We got all the same stimulus. All the same stimulus. And you know what the state's doing? They're taking that money and they're investing it in things that will help us, right, with growth. I was down in Monument Valley over Thanksgiving, and I'm looking over the side of the road, and guess what? Broadband. They were putting in broadband. Our state, so Roger, I have so much confidence in our state leaders that we're not going to let our quality of life deteriorate. We will change, no question about it. Salt Lake County is filled up; it's nearly there. And we're gonna be growing up instead of out and different things. We will change, but I think we will protect our quality of life with our significant leadership.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, another question. Okay. One of the things I thought you indicated is that so much divisiveness has caused a lot of problems. If you could pick one thing that you think would kind of bridge that gap or maybe heal that, it seems like everybody's so separated that they can't come together even on things that make sense. What would be one thing you think would be the most beneficial if we could kind of work together?
I'm going to be real near term instead of like big picture here. Maybe I'll think of a big picture thought, but I'd sure love to see this Supreme Court nomination to go smoothly in our country. Unlike prior times when it may have been like a liberal justice, retires or passes away, and then, the conservative president puts in somebody different. In this case, you've got basically a liberal in the White House and a liberal justice. I think we should get this appointment made with dispatch and show that this country still works. My reading of, it's clear it's going to be an African-American woman that's going to be appointed. I'd be really surprised if that wasn't the case. I think that would be terrific for our country. And I think we should get that done. And in my reading of the people, they're outstanding women that have a lot of scholarly background. So that would be just a really near term to show that that our systems still work. If I were thinking bigger picture, something I would want to solve or be a part of, I guess I would want to make sure that election integrity does not become like the big issue, because I have so much confidence in our institutions. And I think it's dangerous when we politicize them. And so I would hope between now and the midterms we can get through that. I'm not optimistic that we will, but that would be something, when you question an election, that gets at the very ground that we stand on. So we've got to get that right. Okay, Roger, a couple more.
Okay, thank you.
I hope you'll give me some easier ones. I was hoping, there's gotta be someone that's gonna say, how many rate hikes will we get this year? 4.
Actually, I was just on that divisiveness. Is there a gender or age where you see the difference among that demographic? So do you see at the age of 30 or less, 40 or less, and then on the gender side, has that been studied to see where that divisiveness is most amplified and really less in nature?
You know, I do not have an answer to that specifically, but I will say that we absolutely measure differences in generations, in their perspectives, in their beliefs, in their behaviors. I have 2 millennial children. They are different. They are different than me and my siblings, right? They seem to care more about the environment. They don't seem to care as much about money. They love urban settings. Both my kids live in downtown Salt Lake City. And so, you know, I'll invite you to think about what your situations are like that. But we definitely measure differences in the way people interact and what they do. And what I would challenge all of us to think about is how are we changing in Utah? And if I had to pick this up, it would say we're growing, we're diversifying racially, ethnically, we're urbanizing, and we're aging. Those are the big places. I saw data yesterday that the median age in St. George over the course of maybe not my lifetime, but over the next 40, 50 years will get as high as 52 years of age. Median ages are supposed to be like in their 30s. We are aging. And as the population pyramid that Michael showed, it's a dominant thing. And Utah's birth rate is now below replacement level. Can you say that again? Below replacement level. That's not something I ever would have forecasted. And so we have an aging population that we're not replenishing. And then in our state, we've got a lot of people moving in, so changes afoot.
Any other, okay.
Professor, I'm going to be real dangerous, but I'm going to ask, who were some of the individuals that you would like to see leading this country possibly in the year 2000?
That is dangerous.
Now, as stated earlier, this is the yes or no answer.
Yeah, you know, listen,
See, this isn't a bachelor's degree, this is a master's area, so we're looking at scenarios. We need some moral leadership because we're at an interesting point, whether you're affiliate yourself Republican, Democrat, or non-bank of Utah or whatever. No, I'm affiliated. We need some moral leadership, or we need some appropriate transformation leadership, and we've got to move to the next generation. And we've all seen, observed, you know, some of these individuals who are politicizing what politics does. But I'm going to make it real dangerous and ask you, who are some of the individuals that you think could be in place to help us?
Listen, that is a tricky question. So I lead a public policy institute that's nonpartisan and independent. And so I'm really careful about those sorts of things, but you know, you're still entitled to be a human being, a person has ideas and whatnot. I try to be really careful about it. But you know, I'm a political moderate. I'm a registered Republican. When people ask, I say I'm a Bangeter, Levitt, Walker, Huntsman, Herbert, Cox Republican. I think our governors have been outstanding. And I think our state is extremely well led. I saw Governor Sununu, I believe he's from New Hampshire, is that right? I saw him on, it was on Meet the Press, he was on one of the Sunday programs. I'm super impressed with Governor Sununu. I thought, well, that's someone I could get excited about. I was a huge Mitt Romney fan, continue to be. You know, I don't think he's got it in it to do it again, but I basically look for people in public office that take the best ideas from both sides of the aisle and keep an open mind and listen and recognize that people have different life experiences. So I hope that helps. Basically, I take any of our leaders and put them in the national stage.
Thank Thank you, that's excellent. Any other questions? Well, Natalie, we want to thank you. This was awesome.
Okay,
We
well,
appreciate it.
fun breaking bread with all of you. Thank you so much.